This is our third session in our 2023 Perspectives in Sacred Space webinar series. We do one per quarter where we have an initial presentation and then a conversation to delve into the meanings of our built environment. And in case you haven't met me before, I'm Vanessa Avery. I'm the Executive Director of Sharing Sacred Spaces. For us, our landscapes and our built environments embody meaning and contain stories in their history, in their design, and in their use. And we build intergroup understanding through deciphering and reflecting on all of the meaning and meanings that architecture conveys. So thank you all for being here tonight for what I know will be an inspiring and very insightful and deep discussion. So tonight I am pleased to introduce Cyrus Rivetna. Cyrus Rivetna is the founder and principal of Rivetna Architects at rivetna.com if you'd like to learn more about him. And I'll put that in the chat in a moment. He's located in Chicago. His award-winning designs balance aesthetics, practicality, and sustainability, and are located through the United States and Canada. His versatility as an architect is reflected in the variety of projects that he leads, from municipal, commercial, hospitality, multifamily, religious to high-end single-family homes and condominium interiors. While working with Pritzker Prize-winning architect B.V. Doshi, Cyrus developed a deep understanding of community and the vernacular. Each project is an opportunity to improve lives through architecture. And he was a pioneer in developing in underserved neighborhoods in Chicago's South and West Sides. He truly believes everyone deserves great architecture. Cyrus is the world's expert in the history and design, and this is why we're all here as well, of Zoroastrian fire temples. And he's traveled the world sharing his knowledge. In 2018, his design for the Bandara Atash Kadeh was unveiled in Houston as the first of its kind to be built in North America. Cyrus sits on the leadership committee of the American Institute of Architects Center for Practice and is the chair of the Practice Management Knowledge Community. Cyrus, it is such an honor to have you with us. And I'll add that he is just a lovely guy as well. It's a pleasure to be acquainted with you. In conversation with Cyrus is another person I am a huge fan of, Dr. Michael Crosby. Dr. Crosby served as an editor at Architecture, the AIA Journal, Progressive Architecture, architectureweek.com, and is editor-in-chief of Faith and Form, a quarterly journal on religious art and architecture. He's also a frequent contributor to Architectural Record and Common Edge, and writes about architecture and design for the Hartford Courant. The author of innumerable books and prestigious academic appointments, Dr. Crosby is also a registered architect in the state of Connecticut, professor at the University of Hartford, and board member, proudly, of Sharing Sacred Spaces. Always great to be with you, and I'm eager for our conversation. So with gratitude to you both, I will pass the Zoom stage first to you, Mike, to say a few words.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much for that introduction, and I am very excited about tonight's presentation today in some places. Cyrus is not only an architect with some design experience with Zoroastrian temples, but he's also a practitioner of that religion, which is always very, very exciting when we have someone who's designing things that he or she ultimately or intimately knows the use of those spaces and what they mean and their importance. So I know we're going to have a wonderful presentation by Cyrus, and I'm going to turn it over to him because I know he's got a lot of information to share with us this evening.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I see a few familiar faces and a lot of new faces as well. And I will just take a moment to share my screen. So Again, I'm Cyrus Rivetna, and here we are at Sharing Sacred Spaces. We're going to talk tonight about Zoroastrianism and its architecture, and I'm going to focus only on the fire temples because that's what I do know best. But there are lots of other wonderful Zoroastrian buildings, primarily in India, located in Gujarat and Mumbai, and also in Iran and Pakistan. So first, just a tiny bit about me. As Michael said, I'm the founder and principal of Rivetna Architects. I spent about 2 years working with Pritzker Prize-winning architect B.V. Doshi in Ahmedabad. And to the left, you'll see the building we designed on the banks of the Varanasi River. During that time, I spent a lot of time with the Zoroastrian community in India. After leaving India, I came back to the United States, and then I thought I'd really love to go and spend a couple of months in India just to study the Zoroastrian architecture. So I spent about 3 months, primarily in Gujarat and Mumbai, looking at the Zoroastrian architecture. And I then spent a couple of weeks touring around India, looking at other religious buildings in the south of India and so forth. At my firm, we really focus on communities, and we really truly believe that architecture actively affects people's emotions and lives. We're located in a great spot called the Bridgeport Art Center with lots of interesting artists and sculptors as our neighbors. And in the center, we do lots of religious architecture. In the center, you'll see the restoration of this sanctuary space. And to the right is just the floor plan of a church we're doing right now in the Bronzeville neighborhood in Chicago. And that is a Catholic church, and they wanted to look as close to St. Peter's as possible. So that's the flooring pattern that we came up with. So just a quick note about architecture. Architecture can really be sort of give a company or an organization or a community a brand identity. And these are two buildings for car companies. On the left is the BMW headquarters. On the right is the headquarters for Toyota. And I like to show these images just to show how architecture truly can communicate meaning and style and culture for a community. And the BMW, of course, is more cutting edge, like their cars, and the Toyota is a little bit more traditional. They're both buildings with integrity, and I wouldn't say one is better than the other, but they do definitely show different styles and give you the impression of what their cars are meant to be. And religious buildings are no different. And I truly believe that a religious building is a reflection of the beliefs of that religion. So just like the Toyota and BMW plants, these buildings portray a specific image. And that's very intentional through the architecture, that you can understand a lot about the religion through its architecture. On the left is the Baha'i Temple in Wilmette near Chicago. In the center is Wat Po in Thailand. That's one of their most important temples for Thai Buddhists. And on the right is St. Peter's in Rome. And when you look at these buildings, they're very different, and the ornament is very different, and how you feel when you approach these buildings and are inside these buildings is very different. And that tells you a lot about these different religions. And those differences are in size, ornament, detail, and proportions as well. The Zoroastrian architecture is no different. And the style of our buildings really reflects the beliefs of our religion. And I'll get to the beliefs of our religion in a couple of slides, but I just wanted to focus on the architecture at first. And so the religion believes in simplicity, purity, and modesty. And you see that in the architecture as well. On the right is one of our most important temples. This is the Kadmi Atishpuram in Surat. And it's one of 8 of the most important buildings in our religion in India. But you can see how simple it is and how small, sort of on a smaller scale, very different than the buildings we saw in the previous slide. The architecture is also designed at a human scale, and that's meant to emphasize the importance of humans in our religion. The other reason we can have small buildings is because we have individual worship. So some religions have group worship and group congregations. So when you have 1,000 people or 1,500 people, clearly you need a very large building. In Zoroastrianism, the worship is typically individual worship, meaning you can go and pray when you want to the fire temple. So that means that the buildings can be much smaller and the prayer halls can be much smaller as well. We also have a reverence for all of nature. It's not a worship of nature, but a reverence for nature. So when you go inside these buildings, you'll see that nature is all around you, and I'll explain that more in a later slide as well. And you can even see the simplicity in the dress of the priests and what the priests wear. And again, the simplicity in the architecture with not much ornament and detail on the exterior. So I wanted to show you a couple of buildings, Zoroastrian buildings. These are all fire temples. They come in various shapes and sizes. To the left is a very tiny one that's tucked in Surat. This is very small. It's probably about 800, 1,000 square feet. This one's a little bit bigger. It's also in Surat. And this is one of our Atisbrams on the right in Mumbai. It's the Anjuman Atisbram. So when I talk about modest and simple buildings, that doesn't mean they're not grand buildings. To me, you can still build grand buildings, but keep them on a human scale and on a scale that humans can understand. So again, when I say they're modest buildings, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not grand buildings. These are a couple of the Iranian fire temples. The one on the left is one of the most important ones in Iran. It's in Yazd. And on the right is one in Kerman. And you can see again, they're again on a very simple, pure buildings they still have some detail, but not too much detail. And they're on a very modest scale, again, like the ones in India as well. So a tiny bit about Zoroastrianism, and I'm not an expert, so I'm just going to breeze through this. So Zoroastrianism 101. There is one God, his name is Ahura Mazda, and one prophet, Zarathustra. And based on the religion, he lived around 3,500 years ago. And that's, I'm sorry, not based on the religion, based on the language. So the Persian Empire was primarily Zoroastrian. And Cyrus the Great was the great ruler of the Persian Empire. And that is my namesake, because in the 1970s, they celebrated they celebrated Cyrus the Great in Persia. And so around that time, there were lots of children named Cyrus, which is about the time when I was born. We then moved into the Sasanian Empire around the year 600 AD. And then the Arabs arrived in the Middle East, including Iran. And so many of the Zoroastrians migrated to the little tiny state of Gujarat right here in India. They say they came over land and sea. And that was sometime in either the 6th or 8th centuries. So the Zoroastrians lived in Gujarat right around here for over 1,000 years. And then around the 1750s, when the British came to India, they started to develop the city of Mumbai. And the British liked to do business and employ the Parsis and the Zoroastrians. So many of the Zoroastrians then came to Mumbai, which is just down here, and developed the city of Mumbai basically in the 1790s. And then around the 1960s, like many other communities, the Zoroastrians spread out all over the world. So now in almost every major city in the world, you have a small Zoroastrian population. One of our main prayers is good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. And you see that reflected in the architecture as well, sometimes in the script. We believe that you should do good for the progress of humanity and not for the progress of yourself, your religion, or your country, which automatically results in a genuine respect for all religions. So we genuinely do respect all of religions. Traditionally, we do not proselytize, which means we don't think that the world is only a good place once everyone is Zoroastrian. Again, that is along the same lines as respect for all religions. We believe that Zoroastrians have a good mind, and all of humanity has a good mind, and that gives you the freedom to choose and make your own choices. And again, we have a profound respect, and that's not a worship, but a respect for all of nature, and that's an integral part of our religion. Currently, based on current estimates, there's only about 100,000 Zoroastrians left in the world. So we can basically fit in one large football stadium. So one of the main questions is why fire? So fire is, we don't worship fire, just like Christians don't worship a cross. But the fire is a symbol that we pray to, similar to a sanctuary in a Christian church where you may have a cross or something at the altar. And I mean, why fire? I think you have to remember that the religion is almost 3,500 years old. So at that time, fire played such an important part in people's lives. And it gives light, it gives heat, and it gives life. And so all of those things are, what fire has given to us and gives to the world. It's also a part of nature. And it, therefore, since we have that reverence for nature, fire is an integral part of that. So some of these fires are continuously burning in Iran and India. And the oldest documented fire in India is in the Atis Brahma Virancha, which is near Mumbai, about an hour from Mumbai by train. And that is documented to be over 1,400 years old. The fuel for the fire is wood, and it's typically sandalwood. So it always brings out this beautiful aroma in the fire temples. And so this is a picture of what's called the Uffergan. Here's a Sasanian coin. And you can see that the core of the religion since the Sasanian times really hasn't changed that much, or the core of our religious architecture. So I was talking about modest buildings, and these are approximately the same scale, all these buildings. The one on the left is the temple in Madurai, India. It's an absolutely massive temple complex. And the one here is St. Peter's in Rome. Again, one of the most important Catholic, the most important Catholic religious architecture. Then we have the Jami Masjid in Ahmedabad and Hagia Sophia, again, a very important architecture. And then way up here in the corner, we have one of Zoroastrian's most important buildings. And you can see it pretty much fits inside the vestibule of St. Peter's. So we truly do have, again, we have wonderful, beautiful buildings, but they're not on the scale of these other buildings. And St. Peter's, remember, it has group congregation, and same with a Muslim mosque. So they automatically have to be much larger buildings to fit those larger congregations. But since we have individual worship in Zoroastrianism, our buildings can be much, much smaller. I mentioned when the British came to India, the Zoroastrians became very wealthy, and they started to build fire temples throughout Mumbai. And to align themselves more with the British, they used very sort of neoclassical British forms. But around that same time, they were also excavating the ruins of Persepolis, which you see on the right here. And so to make these buildings Zoroastrians and differentiate, they took a lot of these classical details from Persepolis and pasted them onto these neoclassical buildings. So you'll see these doorways here are very similar to these doorways found at Persepolis. These are the columns. You'll see them here, the bull-headed columns, for example, and right here as well. So again, the forms are sort of British neoclassical contemporary forms for the time, but then they took these details from Persepolis. And then you'll also see a lot of flower motifs and nature motifs similar to that you also found in Persepolis here. The winged bull is similar to the entrance that you would find at Persepolis as well. this here is the one, again, one of our most important buildings. And I just love to show this building because to me, this is sort of the quintessential Zoroastrian fire temple. It has the very formal neoclassical massing. It's a very grand building. It looks like a religious building. It looks like a Zoroastrian building. And it has the sort of classic columns from Persepolis. It's this column here, but in this particular one, they just took off the bull capital, and they left this detail here as the capital. And this right here, you'll see how this roof pops up here. That is where the fire is kept. So that's how you know where the fire is kept in these buildings. And these are vents. So these buildings, especially in the prayer hall and where the room where the fire is kept, don't have any electricity. So they use, just the natural draft of the smoke rising to create a smoke-free environment and still have a continuously burning fire. This is that same building, and this is the site plan. And I like to show this to show you all the components that make up a fire temple complex. First of all, they almost always have a wall around them. And that's to separate, the busy life and the busy street from the quiet and peace inside the fire temple complex. You almost always enter through a garden, or there is a garden with the fire temples. The fire temple is here itself. Back here are the priest quarters. Back here are the priest quarters. And then over here are the toilets and the kitchen and so forth. And then there's always a well with all of the fire temples. So right here is the well. And there's also an area here for tying your custody. The custody is a small thread that we tie around our waist. And when you come into the fire temple, you wash your face with the water from the well, and then you also retie your custody. And this room just gives you a little bit of privacy. Sorry. And then this is a blow up of this floor plan here. And again, this is your typical fire temple. Is you walk up the steps. So the buildings are always raised up on a plinth. And that's, first of all, to emphasize the importance of the building. And secondly, if there is any flooding, it raises the building up and the fire up to protect the fire. So you enter the building on this veranda here. You come onto this veranda, and then this is a multi-purpose hall. And a lot of things happen in this multi-purpose hall. It's a place for people to rest and come. It's a place for people to chat with their neighbors. It's a place for small ceremonies, such as the initiation ceremony or a small wedding. It becomes a place for group prayers on occasion. So almost every fire temple has its multi-purpose hall. And then here is the prayer hall itself. And the fire itself is kept in this small square room here. So the fire is kept here. Only the priests enter this, what's called the Gubba Tower. Only the priests enter here 5 times a day to tend the fire. And there's a ceremony that they do when they do tend to the fire. And the Zoroastrians sit or stand in this small room. And again, you can see how it's not a very large space at all. It's on a very human scale, and scale that we can understand and comprehend. These are some pictures. This is the interior of that multi-purpose hall, which is right here. And again, you can see these images are images of priests, benefactors, and other people who have contributed to this particular fire temple. Same thing here. This one is a little bit less grand, but still has a very simple feel and elegant feel. And again, you'll see the pictures of the priests or benefactors of that fire temple. And again, I talk a lot about the Zoroastrian environment. And when you walk into these buildings, they feel like Zoroastrian buildings. And again, that's because they're on this modest scale that humans can understand. You have images of the prophet over here, along with images of the other people. So again, it emphasizes the importance of man with our prophet as well. And there's a certain warmth that you feel when you enter these buildings. Unfortunately, in India, only Zoroastrians are allowed to go in these buildings. In the United States, it's different. We open our buildings to everybody. So unfortunately, pictures are all you can see about the fire temples in India. And then just in stark contrast, these are some other religious buildings, and you can see the vast difference. And these are magnificent spaces and wonderful spaces, but they are not Zoroastrian spaces. And again, these are for group congregation, and these spaces are meant to awe and inspire. And the Zoroastrian architecture is not intended to awe and inspire. Instead, it's meant for personal reflection and for prayer. So inside the prayer hall, we're not allowed to take pictures inside the prayer hall or of the fire, but I was able to find this old postcard that I could share with people. So this is looking from the prayer hall into the Gumbad Tower where the fire is kept. And this is the urn called the Afghan, and you can see the fire there. And so only the priests are allowed to enter this room to tend to the fire 5 times a day. And the Zoroastrians will stand or sit outside around here. I think this postcard is from around the 1910s or so. And you can see the traditional outfits that the priests would wear. These are priests here. And again, the bars are on the windows just to protect the fire. And this, again, so this is a continuously burning fire, and it acts as a large chimney, just like a chimney in your house, where the smoke and the hot air rises to the highest point, and then through those towers on the roof are eliminated and from the building. Now, this is in the United States, we can take pictures in our buildings wherever we want. So this is a picture of the Afghan in the Atashkade of Houston, which I will show in a later slide. So I just show this picture here when a lot of communities come to the United States, they feel like they need to replicate the architecture of their homeland. So this is a temple, an Indian temple. I'm not sure where this one is, but this is a Hindu temple in Houston. And they literally had some of these buildings, I'm not sure if this one in particular, but they carve everything in India. They ship it over here, and then they have the craftsmen from India come and reassemble it over here. And I like to show this picture just to, to me, this style of architecture has no relevance to North America. And these are marvels of architecture, and they're wonderful buildings. But as an architect, I feel like a building should have some relevance to the place it's located. And these buildings look out of place to me in a North American environment. And they're just exact replicas of their ancient architecture. And I believe as architects, we can take the important elements of the ancient architecture, but create modern buildings. And the tremendous cost that goes into these buildings is unbelievable. So when the Zoroastrians came to North America around the 1960s, we literally had nothing. There was no infrastructure, no buildings, no communities. So it took about 20 years or so for the Zoroastrians to start building buildings. And they really just wanted any place to gather and congregate. So this is the temple in Chicago. This is one in San Jose. And this is one in Los Angeles. And so they started to try and copy the details and so forth from Persepolis to give it a Zoroastrian feel. But in general, they tended to disregard the traditional styles. And these buildings are great achievements for a community that was only 15 or 20 years old. But now as our community has been in the United States for longer and been in North America, we're now starting to build buildings that are respect our traditional architecture, but are still modern and contemporary buildings. So this is the Houston Atesh Kadeh in Houston, which I designed, and this was the inauguration in 2018. And again, it has some of the traditional elements, but you can see it's still a very contemporary building. And this building, for lots of reasons, was the first in North America. It does have a continuously burning fire, and it is wood burning, and it has been lit since the inauguration in 2018. And you can see how this building has become a symbol for the community. And it is a place that Zoroastrians from all over North America go to visit this building. And again, a couple more pictures. It's a contemporary building that references the traditional architecture. And the other reason that's so important is that I wanted to create a building that two different generations can relate to. So we do have a generation that lived in India, Iran, and Pakistan. And I wanted a building with those traditional details that they could relate to, but also the contemporary building that a younger generation that was born here in North America can relate to as well. Some more images. This is the front veranda. Again, I wanted to take the traditional elements and re-envision them as modern buildings. These are laser cut steel, and these are reminiscent of the women's clothing called the gara. And so we worked with an artist to design these laser cut panels. And again, taking a traditional element, but turning it into something contemporary. The floor plan, I'll just talk about it super quick. This is the vestibule. This is the multi-purpose hall that we talked about. This is the anteroom to take off your shoes. And then this is the prayer hall with the fire is kept here. And the prayer hall is around here with these built-in benches. Again, this is the multi-purpose hall with the light coming in from above. And again, this to me feels like a Zoroastrian environment. It's on a very human scale that we can comprehend and understand. And then finally, the prayer hall of the Houston Atesh Kadeh. Traditionally, so I wanted it to be a very bright space, an airy space. So we had these windows, but we put this patterned glass in there to prevent views out so that people can focus on the fire, and also to give a little bit of privacy from people outside. So that when people are in this prayer hall, they still have some privacy. We have the built-in benches, so the room is not cluttered. This is the Gumbad Tower with the Afghan, which is where the fire is kept. And again, this is uses this particular one uses electricity to exhaust the smoke and fumes. And then just real quick, we're currently designing another temple in Vancouver, and this will be a unique temple where we're actually creating community. And we're considering two options right now. One is just temple itself, and the second option is temple with 20 apartments. And that's to help relieve the shortage of housing in Vancouver, where there's a severe shortage of housing. This is still in conceptual design phase, but in India, there's neighborhoods that are and buildings that are only for Zoroastrians. And so you know your neighbors, and this would create a similar feel where we're activating this building 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, instead of just on evenings and weekends. And with that, I would just like to thank all the people who I met along my travels in India, and all the wonderful people that shared their knowledge with me. And with that, I'll hand it over back over to Mike for questions.
Okay, Cyrus, thank you so much. That's a fascinating presentation. I have a couple of questions. I want to spend leave some time for our audience members to ask questions, which I'm sure they have. But one of the things that it sort of intrigued me about these buildings, and you said early on that prayer is an individual act, right? Are there any rituals that take place in the temples themselves that are part of a group experience, or what is
Uh,
that? What is that like?
Yeah, so there are a couple of times when they do have group prayers. There's a Jushan, for example, when there's a special occasion, and those typically happen in the multi-purpose rooms. And there will be a fire set up in the multi-purpose room and attended by however many people can fit, 100, 150 people. There are also certain rituals that happen, and those happen in a different space other than what I showed you in the fire temple. But there are some rituals that take place, and sometimes it's in other buildings on the same complex.
Okay. So are the temples used for sort of important parts of a person's life? Like, is there a baptism ceremony, or is there a funeral rite or anything like that that the temples also accommodate?
We have what's called a nojot, and that's the initiation to the religion. And a lot of times those can happen anywhere, but a lot of times they do happen on the fire temple property.
Mhm.
Typically happen outside in the courtyards. And there are a few fire temples in Mumbai that have large courtyards. So the nojot would happen on a stage in the courtyard. And then afterwards, they would go into the prayer hall to do some prayers, and then followed by a large dinner, dancing, and so forth.
Mhm.
So yeah, there are. The death ceremony happens in a different place, and that's in what's called the Tower of Silence. And most cities in India have a Tower of Silence. So the death ceremonies all happen outside of the fire temple.
Mhm. Okay. And if I'm going there as a practitioner of the religion to pray, is there a ritual? I mean, say I'm thinking of people of Islam, right? Where there are certain rituals that one goes through in preparation for prayer. The ablutions, the removal of shoes, is there anything similar to that in Zoroastrianism?
There is, yes. So when somebody arrives at the fire temple, there's the well, and from the well, it's a natural spring well from natural groundwater. You would wash your hands and face with the well water. And then we have the kasti, which you tie around your waist. So there are specific prayers which you say when you tie the kasti. So you would retie your kasti as an act of purity, and then you would enter the fire temple. So that whole process takes maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. And I'm curious about the fact that the fires are tended. And does this happen on like a 24-hour basis? I mean,
So in India, there's priests that are on duty, say,
Yeah.
and they actually stay at the fire temple for, I don't know, maybe a day or 2 days. And they tend to the fire 5 times a day.
Mhm.
And so that's called the Boi ceremony, BOI. And they say some prayers, and some people like to go to watch the Boi ceremony.
Yes.
At that time, they'll tend to the fire, they'll say those Boi prayers, and they'll make sure the fire has enough sustenance until the next Boi ceremony.
Okay. And these 5 times during the day when it's tended, does that happen at a certain time of the day every day, or is it more like prayer in a mosque where it depends on sunrise, and that's when the clock starts, so to speak?
That is a good question, and I do not know the answer.
Okay.
I tend to think it's around the same time of day, but I'm not quite sure.
What's coming up here?
So
Let's see.
Nushin has her hand up if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, Nushin, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cyrus. Wonderful presentation. One question I have is regarding the location of the fire. I don't know if you have an answer to this, but is there a specific location inside the building? Like, is it on the east, on the west? like in the mosque, when we put the mihrabs towards the Qibla, I'm wondering, is there a specific location for the fire? And continuing on that, why is the fire always in something? Like it's not in the ground, it's lifted up. Is it because it's, you said you're not, the Zoroastrians, they don't worship the fire, but is it because of the highness of the fire that is lifted and it's not inside the ground? I don't know if you have an answer, but it would be.
Yeah, so both are great questions, and yes, it is in a specific location. So we have a tradition to always face the sun when you pray. So therefore the fire is kept on the south side of the building. And that way, if you're standing on north, east, or west, you're facing the sun. Now, there are exceptions to that, of course. But in general, the fire would be kept on a south wall so that you could face south when praying. And why is it kept in an urn? So although we don't worship fire, these fires have been burning for 1,400 years. So there's a tremendous respect for them. And they're almost considered like a being or a person themselves. Mm-hmm. And perhaps the most, very important person. So there's a tremendous respect for these fires. And I mean, that's just inherent in the fact that it's 1,400 years old, continuously burning. And you can just imagine how much care has gone into tending these fires. Mm-hmm. And it's very different. There's a very long consecration ceremony for the fires, months. And that hasn't been done, though, for decades. I don't know when the last time that happened. So the fire that you pray to is not the same fire that you would, light on your stove, for example. So there is a tremendous respect, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's a little bit elevated. And out of practicality also, if the priest is standing and praying, they probably want something at shoulder height or waist height that's easier to tend to. But when we have a Joshan, for example, the fire is always kept on the ground. And these buildings will never have a basement because the fire is always supposed to have a connection to the earth and the soil. Oh, interesting. You never have any space underneath it. It would always be on the ground.
Yeah. For your building in Houston, where did the fire come from? Is it something like the Olympic torch, where it starts at a certain place and then gets transferred to the temple?
So yeah, that's a great question. So there's different grades of fire, mm-hmm. and the lowest grade is a Dadga fire. The next grade is an Adiran fire, and the next grade is an Atas brown fire. And the Adiran fire and the Atas brown fire have different levels of rituals that go into creating them. The Dadga fire is any fire. So the one in Houston, we don't have the capabilities to consecrate these fires like we used to. So the one in Houston, I think, was just lit.
Okay. Sam, you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Real quick, well, going back to your earlier discussion, it wasn't clear to me, first of all, is there just a secular calendar that you follow? I'm Jewish, so I'm thinking in comparison to, the Hebrew calendar, which is different. And two, we have a cycle of specific events that have become holy days. Yom Kippur is coming right up. It sounded as if you don't have any of that.
We actually have 3 calendars.
Okay.
And so our prayers are tied to the days, a specific day. And in our calendar, there's 12 months of 30 days each. And that leaves 5 days at the end of the year, which are called the Gatha days. I'm sorry, Muktad days. And so those are the 5 days at the end of the year in which we remember our ancestors and those that are deceased. And so the ancient Zoroastrians realized that there was a quarter day difference. So rather than adding 1 day every 4 years, they would add a whole month so that their prayer cycle wouldn't be thrown off. So that's the traditional calendar in which the new year falls on the first day of spring around March 21st. When they when the Zoroastrians went to India, they forgot to add that month. So every 4 years, the day of New Year's changes and, shifts. And the third calendar is when they realized they made the mistake, they decided to fix it at that time. So there's a third calendar that they fixed, but so we currently have 3 calendars, including the 4th Gregorian calendar, in which we practice as well. So,
But
One do
and
you
just
follow?
well, no, but just because I'm thinking a little bit about the use of the building now too. So we have the calendar, you have events, but it doesn't sound like, and you said that the hall is used for some events, and I made it sound to me more like weddings or personal family things, as opposed to a congregational event or any sort of, I don't know if even during these 5 days, it's traditional to meet together to remember together, or does this individual, Judaism requires at least 10. If there's any sense of a prayer or an event or a holiday where the congregation gets together for some religious purpose.
Specific religious purposes. We do get together, of course, but it's more for, there may be a Jushan, for example, for a special occasion or a special event. But I'm trying to think if we get together and have special rituals on special days. And I don't think we do. Only on the Muktad days, the last 5 days of the year, people tend to go on those days more frequently. But there's nothing that I can think of where we all meet at the fire temple for a specific religious event. You have gumbars, which are like community meals. And again, that will happen in a courtyard, usually of fire temple or some building close by, in which it's just a community meal in which we all meet.
Karishma, you've got a question?
Thank you very much. Cyrus, thank you for organizing this wonderful, absolutely splendid talk. And credit to Cyrus for his immense dedication and his family. Cyrus, a question to you regarding an architect of the modern generation, conserving this knowledge. So kudos to you. How do you cope with putting if a yasna ceremony is conducted, then the last event is actually to pour back water into the well. So when you constructed the fire temple in Houston, did you first divine water in order to create the well first? And the second question is, did you ground the afarganyo and connect it to the earth, or did you just did you place it so that it would be automatically connected to the earth?
Yeah, those are.
Most of all, credit to you for all your dedication and to your family.
Thank you so much. So in Houston, it's not practical to dig a well. So in North America, we are building water features that are reminiscent of the wells. And I'm not sure what they do with the water from the ceremonies. Maybe they do put it back into that water feature. In terms of grounding the fire, it was very important to me that it is connected to the earth. But it's your pretty typical construction, and it's a concrete slab that sort of grounds the fire to the earth through the stone in which it sits, and then through the concrete into the ground. And I think what's important is that there's no spaces or rooms below the fire, that it really has that connection to the earth.
Thank you very much, Cyrus. Maybe if you had a moment or two, you could simply highlight for the audience the importance of the Zarathustri tradition of putting the water back into the well so that it can be shared further, if you wanted to. Thank you.
Yeah, I think all the water from the ceremonies, there's these what are called pavis, and the water from the ceremony is directed to these channels. And it's a really technical thing, but the channels are there to protect the fire. And they also channel the water. And correct, all the water from those ceremonies goes right back into the well to give it back to nature.
Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Cyrus, I don't think you remember me, but many years ago, you very kindly gave me photographs that I used in my teaching at the University of Maryland.
Oh, fantastic.
The
The fire temples.
Forgot, yes. And unfortunately, I stored them on CDs, which I can no longer resurrect because I don't have the equipment. And even when I put it in a DVD, anyway, that's a separate story. I noticed in your last temple that you showed the Afraganyu in almost like a cubicle cell, except that it wasn't 4 walls, there were pillars there. Was that, I don't know if it was in India or whether it was in America, that particular picture, but do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's in Houston.
It's in Houston, okay.
Yeah, so in the traditional fire temples in India, the room is more enclosed. And in North America, our communities tend to want it much more open and accessible to people and visible. So that's why we created that room, but we wanted to make it open. So instead of walls, we put pillars there instead.
Okay, the reason I'm asking this question is I'm a Hindu and I've also taught temple architecture. So I know that the Garbhagriha, or the central, the part where the image is situated, is a cube, very much like the Kaaba, which used to also house images once upon a time. And I wonder if there is a connection, since these traditions did come to India and then go. And of course, India, Vedic Hinduism and Zoroastrianism were connected. They were Siamese twins thousands of years ago. So, and they both had, fire is still very central to the way in which Indian Hindu ceremonies are conducted. I was married around a sacred fire. So I was just curious about that.
Well, so the Sasanian fire temples were, it's called a Chahartak, and it was just a one-room structure with, I mean, it was basically just the Gumbad Tower that I showed you.
Okay.
And I don't know if there were buildings around those, but that was where the fire was kept. So of course, I think there's a lot of sharing of knowledge and practices from ancient religions. So I'm sure there's some overlap, those architectural trends and, because sometimes it was a lot of the same craftsmen were building these buildings, whether they were Zoroastrian or Muslim or Hindu. A lot of times it was the same craftsmen that were building them, and they used some of the same knowledge. So the really old fire temples in India have a lot of Hindu detailing instead of the Persepolis details. So yeah, there is absolutely a lot of exchange of styles and details and so forth from one religion to the next.
Cyrus, I have a question has come in, and it's a really interesting one about mechanical systems and the idea of designing one of these temples and there being requirements in terms of mechanical ventilation systems and that sort of thing. And also, did you have to get the local building inspector up to speed about the fact that you're having a fire in this building, and what kind of an impact did that have on the code requirements for open flame and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So we do have open flames in our house, in furnaces, in pilots, and so forth. And in Dallas, we were able to leverage that code and get permission from the municipality. And surprisingly, the municipalities have not really restricted the continuously burning fires or the fires. Now, we do have mechanical systems to exhaust the smoke instead of the natural ventilation. And there are sprinklers in those rooms as required by building codes.
Yeah.
But the municipalities in which we've dealt with so far have been very cooperative with us. And we've had to have some discussions with them, but there really wasn't much pushback. It was, they wanted to make sure it was safe.
Sure.
They wanted to make sure that it was okay, but they tended to, I wouldn't say make exceptions, but they didn't want to get in the way of the way we worship and practice.
Yeah.
So far we've had quite a bit of luck with all of our municipalities.
Okay. We have time for one more question. Laura, why don't you ask yours?
Okay, actually, I just had a second question from what you were just saying, or what you started out with. This temple in Dallas, is it? You said was the first fire temple in North America in 2018. Are there others now?
So that was in Houston, and there are lots of Durban and fire temples, but that particular one was unique in the sense that it was a standalone building, and it has a continuously burning fire, and it was designed to allow for rituals and initiation of priests, and really to fulfill many of the needs of the religious community. Versus in Chicago, for example, we have one building that has a main community hall and a prayer hall connected. And so we have, parties and entertaining in the same building and very close to the sacred space. So in Houston, they have two buildings, and their weather allows for that. One is the building I showed you, which is just for religious purposes, and across the parking lot is really their community center. So there were a lot of firsts with the building in Houston, but no, there are fires and fire temples and Durban mayors in most major cities. In New York, there's a beautiful building. San Jose, Houston, Dallas, Chicago. In California, I think there's 5 or 8 different temples. So almost every major city in Toronto, Vancouver, most major cities in North America have some Zoroastrian building.
Great.
So all of these are within the last 5 years then?
No, so they started building around the 1980s. The one in 2018 is just unique because of the purposes and the rituals that can take place there.
Oh, okay. So now my original question was going back to the individual worship. So do Zoroastrians primarily worship at home individually, or do they go, like I know Hindu worship, you go in the temple and they're individuals, but they typically worship daily at home shrines, and going to the temple is optional for the individuals. Does it work pretty much the same way with individual worship in Zoroastrianism?
Yeah, it's very similar. My aunt in India, for example, every morning, first thing she does is she starts a small fire in her own small afghan in her kitchen, and she does her morning prayers for 45 minutes or an hour. And then she does go to the fire temple when she feels like it. But yeah, there's a lot of worship at home as well.
Are there fire temples in the southern hemisphere? Because you said the fire's on the south wall because the sun is in the south, but that's only in the northern hemisphere.
Right. Very good point. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know what we would do in that case, but there are community centers in Australia. There's nothing that I know of in South America or in Africa. In Africa, there used to be, but I don't know if they're in the southern or northern hemisphere. So I don't know what they were doing at that point.
You said in Australia, though, that's the southern hemisphere. Do they have the fire on the north wall then?
I don't know. And I think they have Zoroastrian centers with prayer rooms. And to the best of my knowledge, they don't have any real proper fire temples there. But I'm not quite sure what they do. I'd have to ask my Australian friends.
Okay, Cyrus, we're gonna have to stop it there. And I want to thank you on behalf of Sharing Sacred Spaces for this really, really wonderful and illuminating presentation. And Vanessa, I'm going to turn it over to you to sort of wrap up.
I want to just thank Mike and in particular also Cyrus for a fabulous evening. Thank you all for your questions. We could always go for another hour, I know, with these, but may everyone have a blessed day if you're on the other side of the world, and a blessed evening if you're on this side. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time, I hope.